Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the final episode of my Zelda 2 playthrough. With all 6 crystals placed, all 8 spells learned, and all of the items obtained, it is finally time to take on the Great Palace, which is what I believe to be the most difficult dungeon in any Zelda game, ever. And I don't say that lightly. The Great Palace is insanely confusing. I am lucky to have a map with me. Not to mention that it's packed full of the most difficult enemies in the game. But to even get to the Great Palace, you have to travel through what's known as the Valley of Death. Yeah, that's foreboding, isn't it? It's got an entirely new terrain type, and it's full of even more forced encounters. In fact, it's such an endurance challenge that players actually go through the game without picking up any of the 1-ups until they get to this point, at which point they collect all the 1-ups so that they can more easily make it to the Great Palace without running out of lives. And that makes a lot of sense too, because what's interesting is when you actually get to the Great Palace, they actually put a checkpoint there. If you game over in the Great Palace, you can continue from the start of the Great Palace. Of course, you'd be starting from the start of the Great Palace with only 3 lives, and if you save, you have to make that trek all the way through Death Valley again. But at this point, I'll take any courtesy from the developers that I can get. Actually, it may be less of a courtesy and more of a technological necessity. Because, as you may or may not know, the original version of this game was made on the Famicom disk system, which used floppy disks. Meaning that for some games you would actually have to eject the disk, flip it over, and then put it back in order to keep playing. What that means for Zelda 2 is that they were kind enough to reduce the amount of disk flipping you actually had to do. You would start the game on side A, and then when you started playing you would be on side B. Only when you make it to the Great Palace, or when you saved, do you have to go back to side A. That's because the Great Palace and the file select screen are on side A. Everything else is on side B. So by putting a continue point in the Great Palace, it means that you don't have to flip the disc back over when you continue. But I'll rule it as a net positive, because having to go through all of this over and over again would be incredibly terrible. These blue ghost enemies can't be seen unless you have the cross from the 6th palace, and there are plenty of them coming up. Now is a really good time to try to get used to using the trick where if you get an encounter on the same tile as a forced encounter, you will skip the forced encounter and just have to deal with a regular encounter. Because the forced encounters put you through some very difficult enemies, and not only that, with the ghosts and lava pits and a bunch of floating eyeballs, it's very easy to have one of them just ram into you and send you into the lava pit, costing you a life. Yeah, that's why people needed all of the extra lives. It's because the game can take one away whenever it feels like it. So the best strategy is probably to play it as safely as possible. Whenever you see a ghost coming, get up against the wall so it can't knock you into a pit, and then take it out with either the up thrust or the down stab. These are very easy to hit it with if you've got the jump spell, and at magic level 7 it only costs 12 points to cast. This is technically not the cheapest jump spell. That would actually be at magic level 8, where it would only cost 8 magic points. However, magic level 7 is enough, in my opinion. You don't really need to go for level 8. And life 7 is fine for me, but if you want to grind out life 8, then go right ahead. And attack 8, also not totally necessary, but it will make the final boss a little bit easier. So I'm just slashing through all these enemies and getting lucky with the drops. That red magic jar was a very huge boon. So there's only a couple of caves left before the Great Palace. And these caves, luckily, they actually don't have any lava. So far, I've been traveling through this weird lava terrain. That's probably what this is supposed to be. Apparently, the Valley of Death is situated beneath a volcano or something. Not sure how that works geographically. But the cave areas are probably the easiest part. They've only got, well, this scorpion enemy. You can just bounce past it. I've never actually killed one of those, but I think they're worth a decent amount of EXP. And you actually don't need the fire spell to kill them. The eye is vulnerable. Maybe it's a Goma. That would be really weird, because I've never seen a Goma shoot fireballs. Yes, just a couple more steps through the lava area. Luckily, these encounters are not that difficult either. Like, the hardest part of them is if you get the strong encounter and you have to deal with a blue Lizalfos, I think that is. No, these are Dairas, actually. Or are they Lizalfos? No, the Dairas were back at Death Mountain. I've completely lost track of the enemy names, because the names really don't matter. To be totally honest. And I don't exactly have a fairy with me to tell me what the enemies are all called. But as you can see, the red Lizalfos is worth less EXP than the orange and blue ones, which is very strange. And the thing that's different about the blue ones is that they throw their clubs. Like, by this point, you've probably been dealing with enough blue iron knuckles that these are just not worth dealing with at all. So after passing all of these enemies, we are finally to the Great Palace, and the first thing I'm going to do is up plus A and continue. I am doing this only so that I can get my life and magic back and start with a full meter. I mean, this does cost me all of my EXP, but then again, I don't need EXP at this point. This is the final dungeon, and the only reason to get any would be to get life 8. So, the Great Palace. As I mentioned, it's full of new enemies that are incredibly strong. First up is this flaming chicken with a name that I don't think I can say without getting demonetized. It's German or something, I don't know. But those fireballs are incredibly annoying because they can actually bounce towards you and you have no idea where they're going to go. One of the most annoying things about the Great Palace are the fake floors. I just passed over a fake floor. You just jump when you are at the pillar and you'll make it over the pit of slimes. That's your introduction to the fake floors in this palace. And there's going to be more of them as we go. Now, the Great Palace is very big and very confusing. There are a lot of dead ends, and there are also a lot of looping hallways that just repeat over and over until you figure out, hey, the path is repeating, this is probably the wrong direction. Yeah, this palace is not kind. There are no hints, there are no keys that you have to deal with, but there's no townspeople to give you any clues. And, I'm lucky to have a map, I guess. At least the music in this palace is pretty good too. Anyways, we now have a room full of blocks that we have to crush, and there are flying Medusa heads to annoy me as I try to make my way through here. Yeah, this is what they call a challenge, I guess. If you can get the Medusa heads to fly in the direction you are going in, then that's going to make it a little easier, because you don't have to dodge them if they're flying away from you. I'm going to make very liberal use of the life spell. It now only costs 50 MP, which is still pretty hefty. More than a third of my magic meter, in fact. Coming up is another new enemy. This is the Bluebird Knight. Apparently the Great Palace has a sort of bird theme going on, but these guys are just crazy. They're like Iron Knuckles, but they throw their swords and they even jump, and they're faster than anything else in the game. And there is also a blue variant later on, which doesn't really change anything, it's just stronger. So there's another fake wall here, but this one is optional. It leads to a statue that you can get a red magic jar from. Potentially anyways. This thing might turn into an enemy. I've actually never seen it turn into an enemy, but being able to refill your magic like that is critical to surviving this dungeon, so it's definitely a good idea to try and get it, if you know it's even there, of course. There's just nothing that hints at that fake wall. They really needed a Lens of Truth type item. I just really think that would have helped the game immensely. Also, I don't know why I'm fighting this guy. I probably should have just bounced over him, but then again, that would have risked getting hit by another flame, so maybe that was a good play. I just pushed him off screen, which causes him to vanish into thin air, apparently. So, more flying Medusa heads. And I think I'm going to... yeah, I got another red magic jar from this statue, so... the red magic jar that was past the fake wall wasn't really that useful if you think about it, because you can get one here anyways. Moving on, we have more walls that you have to bust through. By the way, these slimes are actually stronger than the slimes seen throughout the game. They've got enough health where even at attack 8, you have to hit them twice in order to kill them. And of course, they're paired with a Bluebird Knight, which is, as far as I know, it's just got bigger hit points than the other knights did. So yes, the best way to deal with them is to just rush past them. If you want to actually try fighting them, it may be best to try and get them to jump, and then you can upstab them from below. Try not to think too hard about where you're hitting them, okay? So in this room, it's full of curtains, which would normally be a signal that you're at the boss chamber, but we're not at the boss chamber quite yet. I think the curtains are just here as a sign that you're going in the right direction. I don't know if there are curtains on any other path through the palace, though. So coming up, we have another Bluebird Knight, and this one is annoying because it's combined with blocks that you have to crush through and a very large bubble. Now, this one is stronger than a normal bubble, and I just had an embarrassing time with this one. I should have just, tried to get past it as quickly as possible, but it wound up draining a lot of magic, which is unfortunate. And as you can see, the Blue Knight has a tendency to chase after you. So take this elevator all the way to the bottom, then head left, And in this room is another bit of a curveball to the player, because in this upcoming room you have to actually realize that there is another fake floor, but you'd have no way of knowing that. You just see a line of blocks and there'd be no reason to think that you have to crush through it in order to find the fake floor and fall down here, but this is in fact the correct path. Maybe it's a shortcut of some kind and I just don't know it. I'm just taking the quickest path through the palace that I know. And that big slime, it will definitely catch you by surprise if it's your first time playing. Even on repeat playthroughs, I never know when it's going to show up. So in this room, this is a little bit more obvious. You have to fall through this hole, and then off to the right is the final boss. But I'm going to show you that there is a red magic jar that you can get here. I think an enemy can pop out of there, but I'm not sure. At any rate, refilling your magic is required for this boss because, as I've mentioned previously, you have to have the Thunder Spell, and the Thunder Spell is the only way to make this guy able to be damaged. This enemy is called Thunderbird, but he doesn't really look like an actual Thunderbird. I think they were just going with the bird theme when they named him. I think he was called something different in the Japanese version, but whatever. At that amount of health, I was not going to survive. I could only take one hit. It may be unfair that you have to use the Thunder Spell on this guy in order to damage him, and it costs such a huge chunk of your magic meter, but luckily, at magic level 7, you have just enough to cast Thunder, Shield, and Jump. Those are really the only spells you need in this fight. It's unfortunate that you can't use Life, but if you get into a bit of a groove with this guy, then you should be fine. He always moves towards you while shooting fireballs, and if you are constantly getting away from him, then the fireballs are not that much of an issue. The jump spell is used so that you have more opportunities to hit him because, I haven't mentioned this yet, but you can't hit him with the down stab or the up thrust. It has to be a horizontal slash, making the fight all the more difficult for starting players. But if you practice it for a little while, you'll eventually get into a groove and be able to beat him. So one more useless key for the road, I suppose. At this point, you could backtrack and get that red magic jar if you haven't already, which would probably be a good idea because, as I'm sure some people know, this isn't the end. There is still one more boss waiting for us at the end of Zelda 2. I don't know who that guy is, but he's not the boss. No, the boss is someone you might have seen if you've played through Ocarina of Time. It's Dark Link! This was his first appearance. And of course I'm going to use a well-known trick. If you stand in the corner and just crouch stab at him repeatedly, he will just walk into you over and over, and it's a really easy fight. This happens because of a glitch. Apparently, in the Japanese version, the disc system could handle better AI for this guy, but when they ported it over to the NES, it just caused some kind of problem, and you can defeat him really easily. But if you want to defeat him the ethical way, I suppose, it's interesting to note that it seems that both he and you do the same amount of damage to each other, regardless of levels or the shield spell or anything. So Link slides across the floor for some reason. I don't know why that happens. I really don't know who that guy is supposed to be, but he presents me with a Triforce of Courage, and the game is over. Now it's time to watch the ending. So, with all 3 pieces of the Triforce obtained, we can finally lift the curse on Princess Zelda, and we've saved Hyrule. Apparently. I suppose without its royal family, the kingdom would be going through a bit of a hard time, especially since there's nobody to use the power of the Triforce to, I don't know what the Triforce would do for these guys. We just used it to wake somebody up from a long sleep. You saved Hyrule and you are a real hero. Well, you know, I can't help but imagine Zelda is saying that in a rather sarcastic tone and Link just goes, "Well, excuse me, princess." They get rather suspiciously close together, the curtain falls, and the game is over. That's Zelda 2, everybody. Definitely a unique game within its own series, and even at the time, this was definitely way ahead of its time. Metroidvanias had not been popularized quite yet. Like, you had Metroid and Castlevania 2, and this for Metroidvania stuff. And even this isn't, like, strictly Metroidvania because of the overworld map. Either way, Zelda 2 was a lot of fun to revisit. More fun than I probably expected. Like, you'd expect a lot of grinding to be necessary considering that this is a very old game, and it's definitely showing its age in some places. Towards the end of the game, it gets really, really unfair, especially in the Great Palace, especially in Palace 6, but still, This style of gameplay is something that I would like them to try and go back to. They could probably throw in some more Zelda elements like items and weapons you can find, some more traditional weapons and stuff. But yeah, I would like to see them try side-scrolling Zelda RPG another time. It'd probably be less expensive than the open worlds they're trying to build at the moment, I suppose. Anyways, that's it for Zelda 2. After completing the game, you can actually start a New Game Plus mode where you keep all of your spells and levels, but you have to get all of the containers, crystals, and items again. But that will conclude my playthrough of Zelda 2, and I hope you enjoyed watching me play through this old classic once again. Not sure what's going to be up next for me, but I've got a couple of ideas, so stay tuned for whatever I decide to play next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see everybody in the next video.